You have been apologizing for something you did not do. Not once, not occasionally, not in the specific moments where an apology was actually warranted. Every single day, in ways so small and so automatic that you stopped noticing them a long time ago. The way you shrink before speaking to make sure what you are about to say will not take up too much space. The way you feel responsible when someone in the room is upset, even when you had nothing to do with it. The way you replay conversations looking for the moment it was your fault. The way guilt arrives before the evidence does, before you even know what happened, as if your nervous system decided long ago that whenever something goes wrong, the answer is probably you. You did not choose this. You were never asked if you wanted to carry it, but you have been carrying it anyway, for longer than you can remember. Stay with me. Because what Carl Jung discovered about the guilt that lives inside every empath, the guilt that arrived before they were old enough to question where it came from, will permanently change your relationship with the weight you have been dragging through every room of your life. And by the end of this, you will finally understand something that the guilty part of you has never once been willing to believe. None of it was yours. Carl Jung said that guilt is not always the consequence of wrongdoing. Sometimes guilt is the consequence of sensitivity, of being the person in the room who feels everything so completely that the pain of others lands inside them as if it belongs to them. And nowhere does this land more devastatingly than in the empath who absorbed, before they had any language for what was happening, the emotional weight of everyone around them and decided, in the only way a child knows how to make sense of pain, that they must be the reason for it. You see, most people think guilt is a response to something you did, but Jung's research revealed something far deeper and frankly far more disturbing than that. Here is what nobody tells empaths about the guilt they carry. And trust me, once you understand this, you will never again mistake someone else's pain for your responsibility. According to Carl Jung, every empath carries within them what he called an inherited emotional debt, a burden of guilt that was never generated by anything they did but was absorbed through proximity, through sensitivity, through the extraordinary psychic permeability that makes empaths who they are, from the emotional environments they grew up inside. Think about the child who could feel their mother's unhappiness like weather in the room, not because anyone told them their mother was unhappy, not because the unhappiness was ever discussed or acknowledged or even named, but because the empath child felt it, in the quality of the silence, in the specific weight of certain rooms, in the way the atmosphere changed before a single word was spoken, and because that child was too young to understand that other people's emotional states belong to those people, because no one ever sat them down and said what you're feeling right now is not yours, it is hers, and you are not responsible for it. They did the only thing that made sense. They took it personally. They looked inward for the cause. They decided, at a level so deep it never required conscious thought, that if they were better, quieter, easier, more careful, less themselves, the pain in the room might lift. Jung called this the birth of the false guilt. The moment when a sensitive child's nervous system converts someone else's pain into their own responsibility. And he said, it is one of the most psychologically devastating things that can happen to an empathic child, because from that moment forward, the guilt is always already there, waiting, before anything happens, before any evidence exists, before any accusation is made. The empath is already preparing their defense for a crime they did not commit. But here is where it gets dangerous for empaths specifically, and this is where Jung's work becomes absolutely essential. Carl Jung discovered that the false guilt does not stay in childhood. It travels. It follows the empath into every relationship they ever build, every friendship, every workplace, every room they walk into where someone is carrying pain that has nothing to do with them. And it does something in each of those environments that the empath has never fully been able to name. It makes them responsible. Not legally, not logically, not in any way that an outside observer could point to and say, yes, this person caused that. But emotionally, in the private interior world of the empath, who has been carrying this guilt since before they had words for it, every time someone around them is in pain, the guilt activates. Every time a relationship becomes difficult, the guilt finds a way to make it their fault. Every time someone is cold or distant or angry, or simply having a hard day that has nothing whatsoever to do with the empath, the guilt is already there, whispering, what did you do? How did you cause this? What is wrong with you? Jung called this the guilt reflex, the automatic, preconscious, completely involuntary firing of shame in response to someone else's pain, and he said it is the most exhausting thing an empath carries. Not because of what it makes them feel, but because of what it makes them do. Listen carefully to what happens next, because this is where everything shifts. Because the guilt reflex does not just stay inside the empath. It changes their behavior in ways that quietly destroy every relationship they try to build. It makes them over-explain, over-apologize, over-accommodate, overextend themselves into spaces that never asked for their presence, because the guilt tells them that if they just give enough, if they just do enough, fix enough, carry enough, the discomfort in the room will finally lift, and they will finally be allowed to stop feeling responsible for it. Jung observed this pattern with devastating precision in his patients. He said that the empath driven by false guilt does not just respond to other people's pain. They reorganize their entire life around preventing it. They become smaller so no one has to accommodate them. They become quieter so no one is disturbed by them. They become less consistently, systematically, across every relationship and every environment. Because somewhere in the architecture of their unconscious is a child who learned that their full presence was the thing that made the room painful, and so they keep making themselves less, in the hope that less of them will mean less pain for everyone else. Jung called this the self-erasure of the guilty soul, and he said it is one of the saddest things the human psyche ever does to itself. Because the empath is not erasing themselves because they are worthless. They are erasing themselves because they care so much about the people around them that they would rather disappear than be the source of anyone's suffering. And that specific, extraordinary, completely heartbreaking motivation is not a flaw. It is the most profound expression of love a human being can offer. Turned against themselves. But here is the part that will absolutely change your life. Because Jung did not just identify the false guilt. He discovered exactly where it gets its power from. And the answer is not what you think. Most empaths believe their guilt is powerful because they are genuinely responsible for too much. Jung said the opposite is true. The guilt is powerful because the empath has never once been given permission to put it down. No one in their life ever sat across from them, not a parent, not a teacher, not a friend, not a partner, and said clearly, without qualification, without redirection, without immediately moving to something more comfortable, "This is not yours. You did not cause this. You are not responsible for how other people feel. You never were." And the absence of those words, that specific gap in what the empath was ever told about their own responsibility, left a silence that the guilt filled completely. Jung called this the permission wound. The damage that is done not by what was said to the empath, but by what was never said. The truth that was withheld, not maliciously, not intentionally, but withheld nonetheless, that could have changed everything if it had arrived even once before the guilt became the architecture of how the empath understood themselves. Here is what nobody tells you about the empath who is trapped inside this guilt. They do not feel like a victim. They feel like a failure, because the guilt has been so thoroughly integrated into their sense of self that it no longer feels like something that was done to them. It feels like something that is true about them. It feels like evidence. Evidence that they are too sensitive, too reactive, too much trouble, too difficult to love without also being a burden to love. And every time they apologize for something that was not their fault, every time they take responsibility for someone else's pain, someone else's mood, someone else's choice, the guilt gets a little more confirmation. You see, you are the problem. Jung said that this is the most insidious quality of the false guilt. It does not feel false. It feels like the most honest thing the empath knows about themselves. And that is exactly what makes it so difficult to put down. So what actually dissolves it? Not affirmations, not being told you are enough by people who love you, not therapy that names the pattern without going inside it. Something more specific than all of that. Jung called it the confrontation with the original moment. The willingness to go back, not in time but in memory and in feeling, to the specific environment where the guilt was first absorbed. To find the child who felt the pain in the room and decided it was their fault. And to say to that child, with the full weight of everything the adult empath now understands, something that child has been waiting their entire life to hear. You felt something that was real. You were not too sensitive. You were not imagining it. You were not the problem. You felt something real that the adults around you could not feel or would not name. And you carried it, because no one told you that you were allowed to put it down. But I am telling you now, put it down. It was never yours. It was never yours. It was never yours. But here is the final piece, and it is the most important thing Carl Jung ever said about the empath, who has been living inside guilt that did not belong to them. He said that releasing false guilt is not the same as releasing responsibility. The empath who puts down the guilt that was never theirs does not become careless. They do not become indifferent to other people's pain. They do not lose the extraordinary sensitivity that made them capable of feeling what others could not. What they lose is the suffering, the automatic, pre-conscious, completely involuntary suffering that arrived before any evidence and stayed after any resolution and colored every relationship and every room and every quiet moment alone with the specific weight of being someone who was always somehow responsible for something. Jung called the empath who releases false guilt psychologically liberated, and he described what that liberation actually feels like from the inside. Not the absence of feeling, the presence of choice. For the first time in their lives, the empath gets to choose what they take responsibility for, not based on the guilt reflex, not based on who is in pain in the room, not based on the childhood programming that made other people's suffering automatically theirs to carry, based on the truth. Did I cause this? Is this genuinely mine? And when the answer is no, which it will be far more often than the guilt ever allowed them to believe, they are allowed to set it down, to let it belong to whoever it actually belongs to stand in the presence of someone else's pain without absorbing it as their own failure, and to remain fully, completely, entirely themselves, without the guilt demanding they make themselves less as payment for existing. Jung said that moment, the first time an empath feels pain in the room and does not immediately turn it inward, is one of the most profound psychological experiences a human being can have, because it is the first moment the empath truly understands. Their presence was never the problem. Their sensitivity was never the problem. Their depth was never the problem. The guilt was the problem. And the guilt was never theirs to begin with. If something in this reached the part of you that has been apologizing for your existence for longer than you can remember, that part of you deserves to hear this clearly. You were not born guilty. You were born sensitive, and someone somewhere let you confuse the two. Share this with the empath in your life who says sorry before they have even finished the sentence, who takes responsibility for things that were never in their control, who has been so busy carrying everyone else's pain that they forgot they were allowed to put it down. They need to hear that the guilt was never evidence of their failure. It was always evidence of their heart. And subscribe, because what is coming next is for the empath who is finally ready to stop carrying what was never theirs and start living as if their presence, all of it, every unedited inch of it, is something the world is lucky to have.